Hi, good morning and welcome to everybody who's joined us at the IBM Data and AI Forum today. My name is Arjun Vishwanathan. I lead the research practice of Strategink, an ROI-led market and industry research organization. I am joined today by two very eminent professionals that I will introduce in a short while to discuss what really is of immense importance to Indian industry and enterprises today. The confluence of data and the technologies of artificial intelligence that promise to bring together with them unprecedented business value transformation. And without further ado, I will now introduce this very eminent panel. I have the privilege of having Seema Kumar, who is the Technical Director for Cloud and AI and Cognitive Solutions for IBM India and South Asia, and Leslie Joseph, Principal Analyst, Automation and Artificial Intelligence for Forrester in India. Ma'am, Leslie, welcome. It's an absolute privilege to be here with you today, and what promises really to be not just exciting but also of immense importance to folks that are hearing us today, which is we are really at that point where Indian industry is at an inflection point of sorts, because transformation is the imperative and disruption is the very clear and imminent and present danger, if I were to be allowed to say as much. Organizations today have woken up to the very interesting fact that they have tons and tons and copious volumes of data, and with emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and solutions that IBM brings to the fore, and platforms, organizations are realizing that their ability to couple data with technology is immense, and therefore to be able to add significant amounts of value to the following few business metrics. The first is an enterprise-wide transformation. The second is experience, both at a consumer level, client level, as well as the ecosystem of partners and alliances and so on and so forth. And the last but not the least is key financial metrics of profitability, productivity, cost efficiencies, margins, EBITDAs and so on and so forth. Now, when you kind of piece all of this together, how do you see technologies such as AI classically bring about, well, revolutionary change within organizations? Leslie, if I may off the cuff just go to you. How do you see AI coming together within organizations in your experience and as you look at organizations? How do you see it coming together and what is really the value that lies at the heart of it?
Thanks, Arjun. Great question to tee us off with. So the way I see it, there are two broad areas in which organizations are starting to use AI and automation. The first is what I call transactional automation, and this is quite familiar to a lot of us because we have seen this typically in the areas of cost and margin control, where organizations focus on looking at some of their back office processes and try to understand how they can apply AI, automation, robotic process automation to drive some sort of value or cut certain amounts of cost or improve margins in some of the delivery of these manual rote processes. So that's one, and that is, to be fair, the lion's share of a lot of the automation that's going on in the industry right now.
That's true.
The second is more interesting, and it's what I call transformative automation. Here, the focus is not so much on back office, it's not so much on margin control or cost control. It's more on things like improved customer experience or improved business models. It fundamentally affects the way customers, companies do business or engage with their customers. So, for example, we already know about companies like Netflix, which are transforming their business using AI across their entire value chain. So that's one of the examples that we all know about. But another example is Myntra, the online retailer in India, where they were a couple of years ago, they were experimenting with this AI technique called GANs, Generative Adversarial Networks. These were a kind of machine learning algorithm that they were applying to analyze the pictures of all the clothes on the merchandise on their website, and mashing that up with sales data and customer behavior data to connect demand to supply and actually start designing clothes algorithmically.
Wow.
Now that's different because it fundamentally affects the way they deliver their products and their services, and that's what I mean by transformational automation.
Outstanding. It gets crazier as we speak about it. But Seema, if I were to come to you really, with the levels of fairly unprecedented use of technology, and you being at the heart of creating the kind of technologies, the solutions, the platforms that organizations are using to really well disrupt experience and so on and so forth. How do you see this entire concept of data AI coming in? How are you looking at organizations kind of adapting and adopting cognitive solutions?
Yeah, so as Leslie alluded to, right, there are broadly two areas where we see AI being applied, and a lot of it, I would say, across enterprises, right, be it large or small, over the past few years, there's been what we call random acts of AI. Okay,
Random acts of
yeah,
AI.
right. Some of it, or a lot of it, to begin with, was directly related to the customer experience, right? It could be a chatbot or a virtual agent or a personal assistant or personalizing the customer experience on the front end. And more so, it's evolved back into, cost efficiencies in the back office processes, bringing in efficiency in repetitive tasks. It could be, automation, it could be AI, ML driven models based on the data that you have, and, getting more and more, getting better at, how you're generating processes or bringing in the intelligence, automating the intelligence. Across both of these angles, right? So the journey to building a cognitive AI based enterprise is incomplete if you really do not have your data layer or your information layer in place. And that is where we say that there is no AI without IA, IA being information architecture.
Correct.
And more so, a lot of the solutioning that we are doing more and more is now a lot to do with that data layer, right? Building an end-to-end enterprise grade data platform where information, wherever it is, and you have multiple sources of data. No data is bad data as long as AI is concerned. And you should have the right kind of platform that helps you collect the data, organize the data, do analytics on that data, and then you have the right platform to infuse AI into your business. So I would say while AI has been adopted in various shapes and forms, the real benefits of AI going mainstream in a real transformational way that you're really speaking of will happen when we have more of these information architecture set in across enterprises, and that's when it becomes mainstream, it becomes repeatable, and also there is a uniform way of governing how it's done across the enterprise.
It's very interesting, isn't it, what Seema just mentioned, that there is no AI without IA, which is the information architecture that organizations really need in order to put technology into practice. But Seema, if I were to come back to you, enterprises, organizations, industry, bodies, and so on and so forth have lots of data, which they have been collecting knowingly or unknowingly over the last very many years, which, well, if I were to be allowed to put it, is classically what we would call legacy data. So anything that has not been collected over the last 2 years perhaps would be legacy. But really, how relevant is legacy data, and how do you think organizations should really look at legacy data, which is the classical question of which needle in which haystack should they be looking at to find true value?
Yeah. So when you say legacy data, right, it's maybe data sitting in your mainframes, in some old archives, in multiple databases, so on and so forth over the years as you run your business. And a lot of that data, rightly so, is dark data, because you're not really using it or gaining any insights out of it. You're not mining that data in the right form. And to go back to your question, right, how do you find the needle in the haystack? I go back to my point on information architectures, right? So you do necessarily need the right kind of information hybrid data management platform, which helps you collect all that data, because we technically do not want to throw away or ignore any data out there.
Correct.
But at the same time, you want to make that data available in the right shape and form for your data scientist teams, for your AI, ML teams to do what they want to do with it in terms of building AI models and so on and so forth. So last year we've done a lot of work in this area, and a lot of our solutions are of course aligned to our strategy around hybrid cloud and ensuring that be it in your own within your own data center, and you will always have a combination, right, of running workloads within your private data center and on a public cloud at times. So we've come up with a platform which is known as the IBM Cloud Pak for data, which gives you that entire IA piece, right, which helps you collect your data and organize your data with the right level of governance. And governance, I re-emphasize over here, because not every data is necessarily needs to be made available. It needs to be governed. There are data stewards in your organization who are safeguarding the data, and many a times it's quite political, right? This is my data, I don't want to give it to you, but there could be certain models, right, and certain governance policies that could be set up in using the tools and architecture in place, so that whoever needs to know and is required to have access to that data uses that data in the right shape and form. And that's what the set of tools and technologies that we've developed keeps in mind the various roles that we are talking about, right? Be it the data engineer, be it the data steward, be it the data scientist, they use that data in a more seamless life cycle fashion.
But if you would look at it from a prescriptive point of view, which is really what your role is, what are those maybe just two things perhaps that you tend to prescribe to organizations and enterprises when they are looking at what is called classically old data versus what you are capturing today?
So I wouldn't say just two things. Again, it is an ongoing exercise,
True
right?
that.
So we start with doing an initial assessment of their current landscape, and then really understanding where they want to get to. Okay, because what are their aspirations? Because again, in this entire ladder to AI, there are various maturity levels. Okay, somebody may be at a very early stage of adopting AI. Somebody would want to really go into a pure self-service mode. So based on that assessment is what then we sort of then phase it out in the way how they want to categorize that data. So cataloging the data, for example, right? So putting it into various categories, understanding, again, aligned to the relevant business, what kind of cataloging you want to do, and then making it consumable. So to answer you, it's an ongoing process where we start with.
It is a journey by itself,
right? Exactly, it's a journey. It's not something which you just do over a overnight project. It's something which we traverse that journey along with the client, help them evolve in their maturity curve.
Outstanding. It's very interesting, isn't it? But I am going to really come to you, Leslie, with something that's of well, fair imperative in today's conversations across industry, which is the whole concept of the future of work, or the workforce of the future, or the workplace of the future, or the workspace of the future. Well, from an analyst's point of view, it's fairly evident to me, and I'd like to know your views about how, and perhaps if I were to articulate, the future of work really is about those digital skills that are going to be required in the future, and that are going to be aided by technologies and cognitive solutions and so on and so forth. But with it comes also a very interesting narrative, which is this entire fear, or perhaps the myopic view of how AI, these kinds of technologies will perhaps take away jobs. Now, while there are narratives at both ends of the spectrum for and against, how do you, when you look at industry, when you speak to industry leaders and folks, how do you see this entire concept of the future of work being the imperative, but the fears also coming with it? How do you see that coming across?
Well, the fear is real, let me tell you that. But the good news is it is nowhere near as much as the media would like to hype it to be. So the way we look at the transformative effect of the future of work on jobs and the economy from that perspective is we look at it primarily in 4 dimensions. And it's very logical to think about it from this perspective, right? So there is the first dimension is the set of jobs that are going to go away and they are not going to come back, right? And that's whatever it is, but it's typically the kind of jobs that involve rote manual tasks that bots and some basic forms of AI can easily come in and pick up and completely do on their own. Now, the interesting thing is that while there is a lot of focus from the media on this section of labor, the reality is that AI and automation technologies are not as pervasive and as deeply penetrated and as capable as you would imagine for them to start taking off large sections of these kind of jobs in totality. There is something called job transformation as well, which I will talk about in a bit. But coming to India specifically, where this will manifest itself is in specific industries such as BPO. So if you think about it, BPO businesses that have largely focused on outsourcing back office processes to cheaper labor, they've come under tremendous pressure over the last few years, and that's going to continue, which is why a lot of the BPO industry, the business itself, has had to retool itself around AI and automation. So that's the first dimension, jobs that are going away. The second dimension is job creation. Okay, so the first dimension, just so I use the right terminology, is called what we call automation deficits. Now, the second dimension is what we call automation dividends, which are completely new jobs that don't exist today that will come into being because of automation.
Will get created.
Exactly. And these are, to be fair, jobs that we don't even have names for. What will they be? Robot manager, knowledge curator, some vertical specific roles in telemedicine. We don't know, but there will be jobs that come in. So net, the impact considering today's traditional workforce is going to be the deficit minus the dividends. So it's whatever number it is. We don't have data for India, but we've done this survey based on US job data. And what our survey shows is that the delta is more in the range of 7 to 9%. So it's not as radical as you would imagine.
One would have, yeah.
It's not 60% or 80%. It's just reasonable.
That.
Now, keep that aside. From what's left, another segment of the labor pool is going to go away into what we call the talent economy or the gig economy. Now, a lot of you already know about this. Think Uber drivers. Essentially, jobs turn into skills that can be traded and bought and sold on exchanges and platforms on demand. There's an interesting perspective when you talk about this in the context of India, which is this, that in India, given the amount of unorganized labor that we have, the sector itself, we're starting to see, and we hope to continue to see, that a lot of the gig economy will essentially be the gateway for some of these unorganized sector jobs to start formalizing and moving into the formal economy. Great example is if you think about a lot of the Swiggy delivery executives or folks
just
at
coming to
Dunzo,
that, yeah.
They're essentially moving from an amorphous, unorganized economy into a more formal sort of a job economy, right? So that's one benefit of this from an Indian perspective. So I spoke about 3 dimensions. This is the third. And so you take that out, and what are we left with? We are left with a bunch of jobs that were in the system, still are in the system. And that's really the most fascinating part, because what's happening with those jobs is while nominally they will still be in the system and they will be called the same things, the skills that you will require to perform those jobs will fundamentally change. The way in which you actually, people actually perform those jobs, at least for 80 to 85% of those jobs, will be fundamentally changed. You will require a completely new mindset, completely new skill sets, a willingness to engage in human-to-machine collaboration and work besides the machines, besides the robots, not necessarily always as the overlords, in some case as the servants as well.
True that.
And actually, I can keep going on about this, but I would love Seema's view on how she sees this. How do you see this transform?
Yes, indeed, Seema. Should
out?
India be worried?
So I think Leslie put it very beautifully in terms of how the human-machine collaboration needs to work, right? It's. I think there's no doomsday out there where they're going to really take over. We are just augmenting, right, the intelligence. And again, at the end of the day, the human experts, be it in any field, they bring in certain capabilities. So what is going to go away is, of course, the repetitive tasks and the things that can be automated, but you're still having a lot out there to unlock, right, in terms of creativity, in terms of design, in terms of various soft skills, if you may, right, which across professions, right, is going to be very, very important in that entire man-machine, kind of a collaboration. But if I were to pick on the question of skills, right, and what skills are relevant, and where do we see as India, as a country, the good news is India is a land of developers, software developers, right? One of the largest software developer ecosystem is in India after the United States. and a lot of education, be it STEM based education, be it data science based education, is really gaining mainstream relevance. At the same time, there is still a shortage, right, of say data science skills or advanced machine learning skills if you look at it in the market out here. But I do think we are placed very well because of that pool that we have, and it's important that we evolve, be it if you look at it purely from a technology perspective, in terms of picking up some of these newer technologies, newer areas, and we do a lot in that space as IBM, right? We work with the ecosystem, we work with developers, we work with data scientists, data engineers out there across universities, with startups, with organizations as well. And the goal is to not make it, not everybody needs to be a PhD out there, right? You can do it with some basic skills, right? So how do you get to that level, and then how do you use tools and technologies to make it more mainstream, make it more scalable across organizations, across the country in different industries.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Which brings me really to the culmination of this very interesting discussion, and what promises to be one of the most important questions of all time, which is the entire democratization of what data means. Because democracy really is a representation of all kinds of people, and equally with technology, democratization of data is a question that we must answer today, because it infuses that much required faith, trust, transparency into the entire value chain of the journey. Leslie, if I were to be allowed to come to you, how really do you see the democratization of data so that all people can access it unfettered, and what do you foresee for that journey, specifically with India in mind?
Sure. So I'll answer that at two levels, right? So the first is purely from a technical level. There is a lot of work going on in academia and in research within some of the large AI organizations, including IBM and others, that is focused on just ensuring that AI becomes more accessible, gets into the hands of more people of different skill sets and different talents and different job roles in the business value chain. I can point to things like AI and machine learning in the cloud that has emerged as a big trend, taking machine learning capabilities to the cloud, to closer to the development environments and the data, so that people of different roles can access this and consume it either as APIs or as machine learning sandboxes to train models. I can point to things like explainable AI or federated machine learning that came up last year, which is really kind of trying to address the whole aspect of how can we make AI respect the rules of data privacy and trust. So that's one level. The second level of democratization is actually more interesting, and this is the more difficult problem to crack, right? Which is, you have all of these capabilities, you have this technology, but you have this organization which isn't typically comprised top to bottom of data scientists and RPA developers and so on. So how do you bring AI closer to the real business, right, where the rubber hits the road? And to us, that's a complex question. It's not it doesn't have a simple answer.
Yeah, it doesn't.
And the way we like to look at it is we like to look at it through the lens of a framework that we've invented. We call it robotic quotient. So you know how IQ measures intelligence and EQ measures emotional stability. So we believe that the ability to deal with automation and AI within the context of an organization is like a muscle that you can train. And to us, it really, we talk about it in the context of 4 key factors. The first is people. How willing are your people and how able are your people to accept the changes that automation brings, but also to embrace them and to really start involving and including automation and AI within their day-to-day work streams. And even in fact suggesting, rather than feeling threatened by AI, actually suggesting proactively or identifying proactively opportunities where they can use this technology to improve their lives and their quality of work. In fact, a lot of the organizations, well, I won't say a lot, but a handful of companies, typically the startups that I advise, are starting to have this conversation internally about data literacy or AI literacy, which is there are the data scientists, but then can the field workers and the people downstream, can they also be aware of AI and data science and what it can potentially do for them, analytics, and are they aware of and willing to use this? So that's people. The second is leadership. While your people are great, your leaders are the stewards of the automation program, and they need to have, they need to be empowered, especially with budgets. And beyond that, they also need to have the skills to navigate and support their employees and their staff as they grow along with automation.
The strategy for sure.
Exactly. The third is organizational structure. And this is really about the governance mechanism of how you actually train and mentor your people, how you manage the automation itself, how you measure the business impact, and how you're constantly calibrating. What are the organizational mechanisms that you put in place to ensure that everybody along the chain is benefiting from AI in a sustainable, or automation for that matter, in a sustainable manner. Wrapped around all of this is the multiplier, which is the most important thing. And that is, no surprises, it's trust. Unless your people believe in the AI, believe in what it can do, aren't threatened by it, but also can get a sense that they understand what it is actually doing, what's in the box, and how is it actually impacting the business, and how are they empowered to manage to coexist with AI. For example, how are humans enabled or empowered to act as a fail-safe in the case of when the AI isn't performing up to the mark. These are real issues that organizations face, and so we've rolled all of this together into a framework called the Robotic Quotient, which we are rolling out with a bunch of customers of Foresters. What it actually does is it gives you a number, but the exhaust from the process of figuring out this number brings out a lot of interesting data points and ideas and insights into the way the automation itself is progressing through the organization. So I spoke about trust, and I would really love to have your perspective on how you see trust evolving in the context of data and AI.
Okay. You used an interesting term, what's in the box, right? And we don't want AI to be a black box, because at the end of the day, it is a big cultural change within the organization, right, where you're delegating what used to be a largely manual or more controlled process by the experts. You're delegating some part of the decision making to an AI-based process. And depending on how you train the model and how you train the system, it's going to work under a certain set of environmental characteristics, and it's going to make those decisions. And if you are not able to ask the question why, right? Why did the AI program or the AI solution make a decision, so on and so forth? It's not a transparent system, right? So you need the explainability, you need the trust and transparency. You also need to ensure that you're not introducing any bias into the system. It's quite common to do that, right? And it all depends on what data you're using to train the system in the first place, right? So one of the most common examples out there is, if you take a very simple example of processing loans and approving a loan, right, based on various parameters. And if you were to train the system with a data set which was maybe largely male, right, you would end up with a system that would have a bias, right, who would unintentionally have a gender bias. So this is a problem which is very important when you're looking at adopting AI, and it's something which we recently took out from our research team and made mainstream, right? It's known as Watson AI Open Scale, which gives you the transparency, right, which gives you the view and the visibility into your decision making as to how did it arrive at that particular decision, and then it allows you to retrain and teach back the system to remove a bias, or to be more inclusive, and so on and so forth. So that's one way of looking at, when you talked about democratization, right, trust and transparency are basic principles of any AI system, and it's important. The second piece, again, to your democratization quotient out there is I'll tie it back to what we spoke earlier about the skills. It's important to have some level of self-service capabilities in your systems. Okay, so how do you use AI to create AI in a way, right? So you could train it in such a way or design it in such a way that you not necessarily need a very high-end data science kind of a team to actually build your models. A lot of it can be pre-built. Your algorithms could be pre-selected based on the outcomes that you're doing, and that's what we are doing a lot with our technologies in the Watson platform, to really bring that level of self-service capability so that even business users can do certain level of self-service AI at that level. So that's the second angle that I would look at it, and that's what will help us scale AI across the enterprises and across organizations.
That's quite really nicely put, but of course with a view on the clock, that is pretty much what we have time for. But I think all of us together must take back a couple of messages from this mighty interesting conversation and discussion that we've just had, which is really that the future is here, whether we like it or not. And it is in our interest, perhaps our highest interest, to see technology as an enabler of everything that we hold dear and everything that is to create value and innovation. Yes, there are fears, there are going to be fair sets of challenges ahead of us, but true value will come when we fearlessly adopt and adapt to technology in the manner that it comes to us and drive what is most important for all organizations and enterprises and this audience that is listening today, which is that business value is primary and foremost, and that we must persevere on. Thank you so very much for joining us for this fireside chat at the IBM Data and AI Virtual Forum. I am immensely thankful to both of you. Very, very heartfelt gratitude and thanks for sharing with us your views. Seema, it's been a privilege. Leslie, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. It's been a wonderful conversation. Please stay focused because we have much, much more coming up during the entire day. Thank you.